We are all hoping that the old way of doing business in Washington is over and that the status quo has ended. We are entering what could be a new era in our country. So with much happening in the nation's capital, I wanted to expand beyond our weekly hour-long podcast to bring you short chats with key players in Washington, from the Senate to the House to President Trump's administration. These discussions will dive into the latest on legislation that's making its way through Congress and the efforts within the administration to drive the MAHA agenda forward. I want to bring these back to you, the American people. Joining me today is Senator Rand Paul, one of the nation's leading advocates for liberty, constitutional rights, and fiscal responsibility. Also, importantly, he is the son of the legendary Dr. Ron Paul. Today, we discuss Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s hearing this week on Capitol Hill, and we also discuss an upcoming investigation into Anthony Fauci and the implications of Fauci accepting Biden's preemptive pardon. First of all, thank you so much for everything you do, Senator Paul. It's a real pleasure to sit down with you. We actually haven't met, and you've been one of the most vocal investigators on the COVID crisis. I mean, there's so many areas of crisis. So this is just a quick check-in with you. It's a part of a new series we're doing, 20-minute segments with those in Washington, just to give people a heads up of where things are. And today we heard RFK Jr.'s confirmation hearing. And, you know, certain Republican U.S. senators are really hesitant to support Bobby's confirmation. What do you think about those senators after today? And do you think any of the confirmation hearing assuaged some of his concerns?
You know, I hope all Republicans and maybe even a few Democrats will be open-minded, will listen to him. I've been impressed every time I've met him of how informed he is, how analytical he is, how he looks at each problem, and also how sincere he is. I think it's disappointing to me to see how, I guess, mean-spirited Democrats were towards him when, you know, he spent probably the first 20 or 30 years of his adult life fighting to clean up water, fighting to clean up the Hudson River. And they give him nothing for that. You know, it's amazing. I don't agree with everything Bobby Kennedy's for, but for goodness sakes, wouldn't you think people on the left who say they like the environment would at least give the guy credit for spending 30 years of his life cleaning up the Hudson River, and not a peep, not a scintilla of understanding for that. And that to me is disappointing, you know, and it kind of is that, oh, everything breaks down partisan. We're not going to like him anymore because he supported President Trump in the election. But there's also many other things that I think are worth discussing. There's been this attitude in public health that public health should be some guy with, you know, that's armed and tells you what to do. And if you don't do what the public health person tells you, we're going to put you in jail, instead of what it traditionally was, which was persuasion. So most of what I see Bobby Kennedy's role, if he gets a position, will be to persuade us. Tell America, you know, some of the facts. I mean, in his opening, he talked about 70% of Americans are overweight. Diabetes has increased tenfold, you know, in the last 30 or 40 years. The type 2 diabetes that's related to weight. And I think this should be an all-out, you know, full-court press on what are we going to do to make America healthy again. And Republicans and Democrats could come together on this, but instead they're very intent on nitpicking and looking for disagreement instead of trying to find common ground. I still think he can make it through with Republican votes, but it's close, you know. There may be 2 or 3 Republicans that we could possibly lose. On the Secretary of Defense, it was 50-50 and required the Vice President. I hope it doesn't require that, but I'm all for his nomination, and I'm all for the President sticking with him and the Vice President coming in if necessary.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for sticking with him. The first thing my fiance said to me this morning as we were watching it was he looked over at me and he says, "I don't think you hate these Democrats enough," based on their line of questioning, their attitude, their complete disregard for the impact of what they were saying, and the fact that millions of Americans were hearing these words and hearing these unfounded criticisms of a guy who has given his his life to the Democratic Party up until just recently. So, I think they're shooting themselves in the foot right now because MAGA and MAHA, they're bipartisan. It's now a unity movement. And they're shooting themselves in their foot. The Democrats are going to lose so many more supporters, I think, after today. My second question for you. So we have Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel coming up. Do you think they're going to face equal opposition as Bobby saw today? Do you think it's going to be slightly smoother for either one of them?
I think it'll be close. I think Kash Patel of the three may have the easiest route, but Democrats don't like him either. But he might have a slightly easier route. All three are going to be very, very close. On Tulsi Gabbard, once again, the people disrespecting her are completely discounting a 20-year history in the military. A woman who's done very well in a field that's been dominated by men, but she's a lieutenant colonel. She served her country honorably. And really, frankly, as far as thinking about foreign policy and thinking about intelligence, we need people who are skeptical of surveillance powers being used on U.S. citizens. And frankly, I think people misunderstand. There's this program called the 702 program, the FISA warrant program. And I don't want to give Tulsi's position, but I would say my position, and I've been very skeptical of it, is I don't mind if you use surveillance on foreigners in foreign countries. But I think Americans deserve more, and our Constitution provided more protections. It provided the Fourth Amendment. And the problem with the way the data is collected now is, let's say you're an international businessman or woman, and you talk to people in Europe. Or maybe you are a politician, and I talk to a reporter that's stationed in the Middle East. What if that reporter then has contacts, and they've talked to somebody in Hamas as a source? Well, now I'm somehow connected to a reporter who's connected to a Hamas source. Does that mean you get to listen to all my phone calls?
Yeah.
Or let's say something has been said in one of my phone calls that you suspect me of a domestic, like a tax evasion or something like that. Do you have the right to do that without a warrant because you're snooping on my phone calls? We should all not want that to happen. But more than that, it even happened for partisan reasons. When Trump ran the first time in 2016, they tapped the phones of his assistants,
Wow.
of Carter Page and Papadopoulos. And by doing that, they weren't spies. They were accused falsely by people of being connected to the Russians or this and that. In the end, it was all disproven. But even if it were true, we have a way to go after criminals. Even the worst in our society, someone who's accused of the worst crime, murder or rape or anything, something that no one absolutely is for that person, we still demand you go to an impartial judge and you ask for a warrant. And the reason is it could get that there were people in government who didn't like you because of the color of your skin. We used to understand that if you were African American, obviously we really wanted protections because there were many biased people throughout our history that would accuse you, and they were sometimes accused of rape or murder because of who they were and not because they were guilty of the crime. And that's why we interposed judges who were supposed to be objective. I think that's all Tulsi's asking for. But the people on the other side of this are the sky is falling, we must give up our liberty, we must exchange our liberty for security. And this has been the age-old debate. And frankly, our founders didn't want to do that. It was Ben Franklin who said, don't trade, your liberty for security. If you do, you'll have neither. And that still exists. So I'm a big fan of Tulsi's also. I hope she can make it through. But there are a lot of concerted efforts by the powers that be, both on the right and the left, trying to stop her. So I'm doing everything I can to try to help her get across the finish line, and I will be supporting her.
Yeah, thank you so much. Some of the accusations that she is a spy for, I think the last one was for Hezbollah. Is that what I think the New York Times tried to tie her to? Is just insanity. I mean, the lies coming out of some of these outlets about her is off the charts. Next topic. So you have been relentless in exposing Dr. Fauci. And you have really investigated many of the crimes you believe he has committed. He recently was pardoned by President Biden, but that now opens him up to different kinds of scrutiny. It is a presumed waiver of his Fifth Amendment rights, correct? So what's like a next step that can be taken in terms of an investigation?
I think Anthony Fauci accepting the pardon, he doesn't escape judgment. I think history is going to judge him harshly. So in some ways, from that point of view, I think he made a huge mistake accepting the pardon. If he wanted people to think he was innocent, you can actually reject a pardon. There's also Supreme Court precedent for when you accept a pardon, accepting guilt. And so in many ways, he has accepted guilt. Now, his pardon is unspecified. It's preemptive and nonspecific, but that also means that it's going to be the burden on him to try to prove that he was innocent after accepting a pardon. My specific plans and my specific target of my investigation is fairly narrowly focused. The research that went on in China was funded by the U.S. government. We know that. But we also know that after 2016, there was a safety committee set up that was supposed to investigate dangerous or gain-of-function research before the money was spent. The money for Wuhan, China, never went before the committee. We do think it was discussed, but we want to see the deliberations. We want to know who was in the meeting and what did they say. If you argued for that it was safe or someone argued that it was against, let's hear and read those arguments, because they made a mistake. They went around the safety committee, and now we have the Department of Energy, FBI, CIA, all admitting that they think the evidence leans towards this coming from a lab. That means a big judgment error was made in funding this lab, and an even bigger, maybe not judgment, but even malfeasance occurred in not sending it to the safety committee. This has all been sort of sidestepped. So I'm actually looking for a very specific meeting or two or three where it was discussed. We know it exists from Freedom of Information. They have never admitted that they discussed it. Well, they kind of say, oh, yeah, we discussed it and said it wasn't gain of function, but they don't give us any of the deliberations or meetings. We now know some meetings existed because we have the subject headline. We know it was about the gain of function research in Wuhan, but then everything's redacted and no associated materials have been given to us. So we're going to try to get that information, that debate, the people who attended it, and ultimately, you would think there'd be a chain of command that someone up the ladder, either Anthony Fauci or Francis Collins, would ultimately have to approve that funding, that it doesn't need to go to the safety committee. If it does link to Anthony Fauci, we will have him come back in and testify. And you're right. They say once you've accepted a pardon, you can't come in and plead the Fifth Amendment on something you've already been pardoned for. He will be made to testify. But I am not just going to bring him in to testify without having the documents, because without the documents, he's a sophisticated liar. And I think he will dissemble, is a nice way to put it. He will be disingenuous, and he will split hairs to try to avoid culpability. And that's what he's done throughout my exchanges with him. But we are going to have a friendly administration. I hope Bobby Kennedy will be in charge of HHS, which oversees NIH. I also have met and know Jay Bhattacharya, who I think is a wonderful pick. And I think they will give transparency. I think we will finally have light shed on this that has been hidden for 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, and what a relief that's going to be for so many Americans that have completely lost trust in the government's capacity to navigate a global pandemic.
Yeah, and I think overall global trust or government trust is at an all-time low.
Yeah.
And they want to blame people like me or Bobby Kennedy for sowing distrust. But it's really when people are dishonest with you and the government is dishonest, that's where the distrust comes from. That's why I think Bobby Kennedy can actually restore trust in government pronouncements and in the government by putting forward the studies. Let's expose everything. Let's just be very honest. And there's some facts that I don't know the answer to, but I think that the data is there. So let's say you're like many people over 65 and you're not one way or another on vaccines, but you saw a lot of old people dying and you said, I'll take the vaccine. Most people over 65 did take a couple of vaccines at least. So let's say you took 2 COVID vaccines and you had COVID at least twice. That's a lot of people. That's really what happened to most people. They took the vaccines, they got it, but then the argument is, well, they didn't get as sick. But the argument moving forward is, what is their risk now? So let's say I decide I'm tired of taking the vaccines. Now I'm a little worried about it, or I don't think it's that dangerous and I've already had it. What is my risk of going to the hospital? What's a concrete number? Give me a number. What's my risk of dying? I think of going to the hospital is close to zero and of dying is close to zero. Now, other factors. Do I have diabetes? Am I overweight? Am I 120 years old? There's a lot of factors that go into this, but let's sort that out. Let's present the data. Instead, we get every 6 months you should keep taking a vaccine for COVID, and it doesn't seem honest to some of us. And then we now have Pfizer paying $800 million to the NIH to share the patent. We have Moderna paying $400 million, over $1 trillion. And so it becomes, I would think, impossible for a human to be objective. If you give me $1 trillion, I'm going to be somewhat biased towards the person who gave me the $1 trillion. And so there are these problems with conflicts of interest. But I think the CDC has enormous amounts of data. I've met Dave Weldon, the nominee for that. I think he'll be good also. Let's put the data out there so people can make an honest decision.
Yeah.
And also, the risks and benefits may differ depending on your age. Definitely with COVID, there's a huge difference in your risk, whether you're 10 years old or whether you're 85 years old. And just get the facts so people can make an honest decision. And I would never want to prevent somebody from getting the COVID vaccine if they were 80 or if they were 5. Now, I think really, given the evidence, I would say it's malpractice to give it to a 5-year-old. But to an 80-year-old, I'm sort of in the middle and, give the facts, but give us the updated facts. In 2020, it was much more dangerous than it is today for 2 reasons. The virus has mutated gradually to become less dangerous. And this is fairly common with viruses, but also our immunity has continued to go up for 2 reasons. One, naturally acquired immunity, but also the vaccine has increased immunity as well. So we have increased immunity and decreased virulence. And so let's assess it now. Give us an idea. What was the death rate in 2020, in March of 2020? What's the death rate now? And do I need more vaccines? Do I have to take a vaccine every 6 months, And I don't think we've been honest about that. Unfortunately, most people in Washington, these senators, they don't want to hear that. They don't, they want blind allegiance, and blind allegiance isn't the way medicine works. I mean, talk to anybody who's had cancer about all the choices you have, trying to figure it out. What should I take? What are my chances of survival? What are the side effects? Government shouldn't tell you that. Medicine should inform you as to the possibilities, the risks. Everything has risks, everything has side effects, and then everybody has to make their own decision. Some people are given 4 months to live and have pancreatic cancer, and they say, I don't want any treatment. I'm going to live my life the best I can for 4 months. And can I get 5 months by taking all these things? Some people will, some won't. It's, there's such personal decisions, which are really about bodily choice, and you'd think the left would be better on this. But they seem to be on some medical decisions and not on other medical decisions.
Yeah, people today are publishing how much money each of these senators at the confirmation hearing today received from pharma and medical industry. And it's astounding how much money has gone into some of these individuals that claim they're these Democratic heroes for the little guy. Warren and Bernie together have amassed millions of dollars of receipts from Big Pharma. And that is a huge sum of money when you're talking about these races that they're in. So that's not how much it takes to win these races. I've analyzed it. So they're getting all of this money to do this work effectively on behalf of these companies to effectively be a marketing extension for them. And worse, ensure that the federal government and our tax dollars continue to buy their products. And I have to share with you, Senator, I've had many startups and mid-size biotech companies reach out to me and say, hey, we are actually developing a safer vaccine, and we just can't get through because Pfizer and Moderna, they're monopolies at this point. Merck, they have a monopoly and there's no competition. And so, of course, we can spend all of this time and investment into researching safer vaccines, but we just can't break through in the market because the government has created these monopolies.
Yeah, you think about it. There's all the money, the monetary influence of big pharma on politicians. But then there's the big pharma contributions in the form of advertising that goes to news channels. So those news channels are very biased in favor of one opinion because of the advertising. But then it's even worse. we now pay doctors directly to give vaccines.
Yeah.
And we got away from this. When I started my training, there was many dinners and things that were legal to go to, and the big pharma came in and bought dinners for residents and young doctors who weren't making much money. They finally went away from that, and it's actually, if not illegal, we made it unethical, so doctors can't accept it, and big pharma pretty much doesn't do those things anymore. But I think it's equally as insidious or worse that they actually pay direct cash now for doing vaccines on children, which really, I think the science isn't good for the COVID vaccine, because the death rate is essentially zero for healthy children, and because even the hospitalization rate is close to zero for healthy children for COVID, and that was even in 2020. Now it's getting closer and closer and closer to zero, because kids just, almost every kid's had this, and kids just don't get, it's hard to tell when a kid has had COVID because they just don't get very sick. But we've had this evolution of things, and yet still we're paying doctors money, and it's not an insignificant amount. I think some of the doctors were making in the at least the thousands of dollars, maybe not tens of thousands of dollars on vaccines by pushing them. And that's not right.
It's very wrong. And these kids, the myocarditis and pericarditis reports, some of these kids don't even know how to talk about the fact that they don't feel right in their chest. And so it's hard for them to communicate. Before we hop off, everyone has their eyes on H5N9, the bird flu. Here in California, they're starting to put into measures what that next pandemic is going to look like. People are stressed out. Farmers as well, concerned that they're going to lose rights in protecting their stock. Reports of many chicken stocks getting culled. Questions if the price of eggs going up is related to this. Any thoughts on that?
I think the good news, if there is good news so far, is that most people that are getting the avian flu are getting it from the animals, but not from other humans. This is typically the way animal viruses begin jumping over to humans. Now, there's a chance that it will mutate and go human to human. What was extraordinary about COVID-19 is it didn't do this indolent jumping one at a time and not spreading on humans. It immediately went through humans. And so that's why we think COVID was pre-adapted to go human to human. And in fact, if you look at how COVID fits to the receptor of the cells, and you look at a whole range of other animals, the animal that it best fits the cell for was humans from the very beginning. So we think it was designed or adapted for humans. With the avian flu, so far it's not human to human. So my hope is it won't be. I think an interesting
sorry to interrupt, but is there a lab that is doing research? I've heard of a lab that's doing the human to human transmission of bird flu. I believe it's in Michigan, that was funded by the Gates Foundation to study avian flu going human to human.
Yeah.
Is there a risk I've heard of some of these lab leak risk across our nation. They're terrifying.
Yeah. I think that there's a much greater risk of avian flu being deadly if it comes from a lab. From the animals, it is going to be a bad luck thing that may happen or may never happen. But from a lab, if they're growing it in mice that have human lungs, they're adapting it, they're pushing it to adapt to human cells, and then it's a great danger. But one thing I was going to say, and I don't know if you've had him on or if you know of him, but do you know Joel Salatin is a great sort of sustainable farmer. But one of the things I learned when I went to his farm in the Shenandoah was that he doesn't vaccinate his chickens and rabbits, but he discovered if he gets too many of them, they do die from disease. So he's small enough that I think the number was like 200, that if he has less than 200 chickens or less than 200 rabbits together, they don't seem to get sick, and he can get away without vaccinating. The enormous farms that provide all the frozen chicken and stuff like that, you probably can't have those kind of farms without trying to vaccinate them against disease. But if you're trying yourself to find something healthy, you might do better getting produce from smaller farms, because I think the animals need less antibiotics, they need less vaccines. But if you don't give the vaccines and antibiotics to the ones in the enormous farms, then people get sick from the animals getting sick. So it's a catch-22, but it's an interesting debate to have. And avian flu, we're still watching, but the main thing we need to guard against is people purposely mutating it in the lab to make it more contagious. That's why I want a new oversight panel appointed by the president that could cut off gain-of-function research. It's a death
Yes.
wish to be taking avian flu and trying to make it infect humans. That shouldn't be done in labs.
Yes, yes. Oh man, that's the anthem of the day, isn't it? Well, Senator Paul, you are I'm a fan of yours. You have a lot of fans out here across the nation. Thank you for your continued work and advocacy. We appreciate you. We feel better that you are in government.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care.